thank you for that. So make sure we catch Jason and Chantel's testimony here, but I'll also make a summary recording presentation available too. So thanks, Kathy. Okay, so a little bit about the process. There's 4 phases. I would say a lot of planning processes typically skip the first 2 and go straight to planning and acting. But it's this all builds on itself, and the early phases are really what lay the foundation for being able to plan and act. So the first phase is to imagine what success in your community looks like. What would your community look like if you had greater engagement from a bigger cross-section of people? So during this phase, there's an initial group of people who are working on getting things rolling. They set goals together. They work on building awareness. But I'd also mention that the goals that they're setting at this point are not just on the ultimate outcomes that we might like to see, like more housing or improved quality of life or more businesses, but also goals for engagement of who do we need to involve? What do we want engagement to be like in the community? And so by setting goals for engagement, we ensure that we involve everybody. And they do this using a tool that I wish I had thought of called the Community Network Analysis. It really is a great tool for identifying and involving everybody in the community. So here's kind of an example. This is one of the guiding tools that comes up over and over again in the community heart and soul process. It helps us understand the full scope of who lives, works, and plays in our community and how to reach them. And this is where we start tapping into the local knowledge of both our formal and informal networks. If we don't know the full composition of our community, we don't stand much of a chance for engaging it. So the other thing to mention here, you'll see specific names. I think a lot of us have been through processes where we see who's responsible for getting something done, and we see maybe an acronym like the BBVHC. And what I like about this and the community network analysis is that you identify those formal and informal networks and identify real actual people who are connectors to those networks and start to understand how they're connected to each other and where do we need to show up to be able to reach them. So here's an example from Hamilton, New Jersey. They mapped out all these networks in their communities, both formal and informal. Could be government, civic service organizations, business community, faith communities, and you map out who else, what other subsets or groups are part of these networks, and who are the individuals that you can connect to reach these people. So the second phase is to connect. So once we've figured out all these different groups, how do we connect to them? We know that stories are powerful, and so storytelling can be a helpful way to connect and to get an idea for what is our community actually like today. I'll say, going around Nebraska, we tell a lot of bad stories about ourselves. There's nothing to do, or oh, the good old boys network controls everything, or no one wants to be involved. We don't have any young people here. Those stories really aren't true, or at least they're incomplete. So this storytelling process is so critical in getting an accurate idea of what our community is actually like. And while the main goal of gathering people's stories is to get ideas heard and gain information about what matters to the community, equally important is the connections that are being made through the storytelling. People become interested in each other, learn new things about each other, they're building trust, and they're discovering common ground that they can draw on later when it's time to get things done. Community Heart and Soul also has, in their step-by-step process, has a lot of great resources for different ways to involve people. You'll hear them mention both thin and thick engagement. So on the example that you have on the screen, this was a brew pub in Colorado where you can catch people for just a couple of minutes while they're having a beer. They can write something they love about their town and something that they would change if they could. And this is just one of the ways to catch people where they are, get a little bit of a snippet of their stories, and use the time that they have available. For another example, though, what the thick methods of engagement is when we're actually diving into the stories, getting depth of why someone continues to live in their community. So to model this a little bit and just break up the presentation, I'd be wondering, Tina, you shared about the Bohemian Duck as your favorite place in West Point. And I'm wondering if you'd be able to open your mic and share a little bit about what you love about the Bohemian Duck and why you love that about West Point.
Well, the Bohemian Duck is a restaurant.
Okay.
It was opened like a month before COVID shut everything down by a young gentleman that moved back to our community. So just the idea that he came back, and it's amazing because the restaurant or the building it's in was like a cafe, and I don't think anyone could have imagined what it looks like now. And it truly feels like, we're a town of 3,500, and it feels like you're sitting in downtown Omaha when you're in this restaurant. And just the atmosphere is great as far as how the building's set up. So that's kind of it.
Great. Well, thanks for sharing that. So if you're listening, what did you hear there for the rest of us? There's a lot more there that you could follow up with Tina about that guy's story, or more about what she loves about that restaurant, or when she likes to go. So through those stories, you gain a deeper sense of engagement. There's more there to connect on and start to build those relationships and trust. Thanks, Tina, for sharing that. The other important part of storytelling is to share those nuggets of information back to the community in creative ways. There's an example here of taking pictures of people just writing one word. And the other example here is this woman who has used her loom to make to write snippets of people's interviews onto the fabric, and had an event where those were displayed and people could come and see those. So there's lots of creative ways, but feeding the community's information and stories back to itself, holding up that mirror to show who are we and what are the things that are important to us, is a critical part of that story sharing process. And so once all of that's gathered, we compile those together, and these stories become the heart and soul statements. The community heart and soul process has, frankly, some ingenious tools for collecting, compiling, and sorting all of this information into data, into these statements that we can use then to that we can then use to be our guideposts for making decisions in the community. So by the time you're done with this phase 2, you should have a clear picture of what matters most to the community through the stories that you've gathered. So then moving on to phase 3 is the planning phase. And this is about gathering action ideas that align with those heart and soul statements. So through all that listening, through all that connecting, you develop these heart and soul statements, and then you prioritize ideas and make decisions about what to move forward with, including as many people as possible throughout the process. And then it's on all of this foundation of these first 3 phases that propel the community to take action in phase 4. So these action ideas are driven by the community heart and soul statements, which are rooted in the stories of the community. And then these ideas become opportunities for collaboration, for working together and using those relationships that you've built in new ways to get things done. So working with these 3 principles, community heart and soul, communities have found some really remarkable results, and we'll be able to hear from Chantel and Jason about those results that they've experienced in Iowa. One of the things I loved about going through the coach training process with community heart and soul was being able to hear these stories. And I think going into a process like this, you wonder, are the stories really true? Is it all it's cracked up to be? But the stories do speak for themselves, and hopefully the way Jason and Chantel share about what's happened in their neck of the woods will also be great examples of these outcomes that you can see on your screen from communities that have gone in through Heart and Soul. Also, I just wanted to mention, though, you can go to their website online, get a profile of lots of communities who have gone through this process, and read those stories for yourselves. But with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jason. Looks like Chantel is joined by phone. Hopefully you're there, Chantel, but I'll turn it over to Jason first, and then he can introduce himself, some of the work that they've done with Community Heart and Soul in Iowa, and then also Chantel. So with that, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen and turn it over to you, Jason.
Great, thanks, Daniel. I appreciate all the hard work and introduction. I can skip a lot of the details since you've got that all covered, and I can really speak to my experience coaching Heart and Soul, and also kind of the motivation for why our foundation is working with Heart and Soul. So I work at a community foundation, the Community Foundation of Greater Dubuque, which covers the 7-county region in eastern Iowa, about as far away from Nebraska in Iowa as you can possibly get. No offense, I'm not trying, that's just how geography works. And we, as a foundation, decided through some connections that we made with the Heart and Soul folks, that this would be a great way for us to increase the impact of philanthropy in our 7-county region by really understanding better the needs of our communities. I think a lot of philanthropists, that's a big question we get asked from donors, is what's the impact of our dollars? So we wanted to do something meaningful, and Heart and Soul is a really intentional way to reach the people who we often think of being most impacted by philanthropy, right? People in need, people who are missing voices, who are slipping through the cracks. How do we reach them with our philanthropy, especially in rural areas? So the Heart and Soul tools, as Daniel has explained, are specifically tailored for doing work in rural communities, especially because they do this work in ways that isn't just about surveys and like having a few focus groups and calling it a day. It really is about not only learning about communities, but also building capacity in those communities to make better decisions about their future. And that's one of the things that I really hope that we see happening in our rural communities, is that there's a transfer of skills. Like I really want the people in the towns that I work in to learn how they work together differently, how do they make decisions differently based upon what they've learned. So as a coach, and as Daniel and Jen can attest, we are on the sidelines, we are coaching the local team, but I'm really helping them build skills and learn how to do this community engagement work and data analysis for themselves, so that in the future, as these needs arise, they develop some muscle memory and really do this work themselves differently next time, even if I'm not around. So some of the things that I've seen Chantel and some of the other folks in their communities do is, how do they continue to use their data that they gathered during Heart and Soul to make future decisions, but also how are they operating differently and thinking about residents of their community differently. So so that's kind of my role as a coach. It's why my foundation does this work. So I would, Chantel, hopefully you're on and you're hearing what I'm describing here, but I would like you to tell our group a little bit about how Cascade got involved with Heart and Soul, why your community chose to enter into this work.
Yep, can you hear me?
I can.
Yay, here I am. Yeah, so as Jason said, it was actually a unique situation when we got involved, because we were starting to go down the path of another project that had kind of come to light, and trying to form a committee to figure out what should we be doing and what should we be working on. And then Heart and Soul kind of dropped in our lap as something that, none of us really knew anything about, and we started hearing about it and found out that, one of the things, I volunteer a lot in the community, and I'm on a couple different boards in our community. And it seems like, from a board perspective, or even with the city council, you hear from the people that show up, but you don't necessarily hear from the people that don't show up. So when you're making a decision and you're trying to decide the next thing to do or what's most important, if it's not one of the louder voices talking to you, you always kind of wonder, are we doing the right thing? So when we heard about Heart and Soul and heard about how the fact that, you can really go out and learn how to get a cross-section of the community with all, from young to old, from I've lived here, 5 minutes to I've lived here all my life, and really talk to all those different people, different demographics, different income levels. That was really exciting to know that we can, then go out and figure out, what does this community really want? We're a growing community. We've had a lot of things go on in Cascade here in the last several years. So it's just, where are we going? What do we want to continue to work on and make sure that we're doing the right things? So that's kind of how it came about in Cascade. And then, we went through the process. It was kind of unique because at the end of our process is when COVID hit. So that was kind of a bummer because it obviously slowed things down for us to do the whole presentation at the end that the other gentleman was talking about. That, we took it back to the council and as kind of a planning tool for the future, not just for committees that step up and want to do things like low-hanging fruit that we may have that people want to do in the community, but also long-term planning and what do people really want to do going forward when those council members sit down and do their budgets in the next several years, what to really be thinking about. The other thing that I really like that came out of Heart and Soul is you not only learn the things that people want, but you learn the things that people love. So, you walk away and these are the things that people love about your town, that, the kind of the things that they value about it, and those are the things that kind of guide you and lead you as you're making your decisions going forward to ensure that you're still doing those things that people love as you move forward through the process. So that was another interesting aspect as well.
So Chantel, who were in particular in Cascade? I know you all had some particular goals for who were perceived as missing voices in your community. Can you talk a little bit about some of those people that you heard from and kind of what you learned from some of that?
Yeah, I think that just, we always constantly heard, it's always the same people involved. That's just something that, happens with people that tend to volunteer or get involved. So it was really trying to understand who are the people that are in the shadows that we might not hear from normally and how do they feel about things. We have a lot of newer people that have moved to town. So really, how do you, get out and talk to those people and figure out, hey, you moved to Cascade, that's great. Why are what do you love about it so far, and what are things you'd like to see in our community going forward? We always also want to draw upon the knowledge of our, people that have been here a long time. So that was, another goal. And then we have a Hispanic population as well. And, when we have events and other things going on in town, sometimes they may not come to those events. So it's really trying to feel more inclusive and welcoming and really, making sure that everyone in the community is a part of what we're doing going forward.
I thought, and when you and I were preparing for this, Chantel, I know when we were emailing back and forth, one of the interesting case studies, I think, for how this process works moving forward is the work that you're doing on your new library.
Yep. Yeah, that was exciting. So yesterday, there was actually a presentation that transpired in front of our local county supervisor board in talking about some dollars. And we were able to go to that presentation and really explain to them that, we know we have buy-in from our community about this project because we did go through this process, and we know that that was one of the top things that people are looking for as an amenity in our town. So, everything we do, anytime we're in meetings or anytime there's boards now, there's committees, it's talked about. It's talked about within our local businesses and our chamber. It's really kind of, it's, I guess, ingrained in us now that, we kind of go back to that always to see, like, where are we at? What have we done? What are we still working on? And I think that it's been great.
And I believe the quote that I heard, Chantel, about your presentation for the Board of Supervisors was, you all, Cascade, have set the bar pretty high for future communities that want to come in and do this kind of work, because you've got all this research and you've got all these stories and you've got all these letters of support and things. Every other community is going to be a little hard pressed to meet your standard. Is that a fairly
That's what-
accurate quote?
That was fairly accurate. Yep, it was a good day.
Yeah, so so is there anything else, Chantel, that you want them? I mean, these are all folks on the call who are thinking about Heart and Soul. They just want to learn more about some of the impacts. Is there anything else that sticks with you that's noteworthy?
I mean,
maybe talk about Megan.
Oh, yeah, so we had one of
I love
our,
that.
yeah, so Megan was one of our committee volunteers, I guess I should say, from a Heart and Soul perspective. And she is now actually has been elected and is on our city council, which is another good story. So, obviously she's very passionate about Heart and Soul. We were very lucky because 2 other members of the city council were on our committee as well. So we had a very good cross-representation on the committee from various businesses, the chamber, the council, like I mentioned. We had young people on the committee. We had people from the high school that were on our committee. So we kind of started within the committee, if you will, to have that cross-section of people. And I think just hearing that you can hear what people really want as a community, not just a few people of what they may want, I think has just really been a big draw for this process for everyone.
And I think the cool thing about Megan getting elected to city council too is that she was involved in some things like with her kids' school and stuff, but she wasn't super involved in the community until she really saw how much other people loved their town and some of the action ideas and how much hope there was using that data to really make a difference. I think it really empowered her to kind of think, geez, this is something that we need. First of all, we need people to step up and do this stuff. And people really love this town. There's a lot of positive, good things happening here. And as Chantel mentioned, the city council was super involved with the process itself and physically taking the data and the action items and things and incorporating them into their work plan and their budgeting process. We had a work session with city council and sat down and said, all right, fellas, at that time it was all fellas, let's, what's already in process? What can we use from this data? And it was interesting too, and Chantel was at that work session, how many of the things that were on the work plan or that the community came up with, like, I wish you'd do this, I wish you'd do that, we need this, we need that. And the council was like, we're already doing that stuff. Well, you might be, but you're not talking about it, or you're not telling people about it in a way that connects with something they care about. And if you think that people are going to know about stuff you're doing by reading the council minutes or reading that really boring article that's in the paper every week that's about what happened at city council, if that's how you think people are finding out about stuff you're doing, forget about it. So it was just very helpful, I think, for them to realize that they were also kind of on the right track. So there was some success that they could connect with themselves, which I think led them to think, yeah, maybe there's something to this. Maybe this other stuff that we're not doing should be prioritized. So very cool.
Great, thanks both. If anybody has any questions, be thinking, and feel free to ask them of Jason or Chantel, or myself, or I forgot to mention Jen McEwen. She's in COZAD. She's also a certified Heart and Soul coach as well. There she is waving.
Hi, Jen.
Hey, Jen. I did want to ask Jason if there's anything, a lot of times people hear about, I think, and sometimes in this stuff, it's like, oh, it sounds kind of squishy, or engagement, or, well, what's this really going to do for the town? And I guess if you could just talk about maybe how you've seen it show up in really a big way, or why that's so important from your perspective too.
It is super squishy. And I think that is part of the thing that, especially in those first 2 phases, like the kind of getting the process started and the story gathering part, the connecting with the community part, a lot of the action-oriented people in the communities are all like, when are we going to do something? I want to build a pool. I want to build a community center. What's going on here? When are we going to stop talking about what we love and do something? That's kind of those are the moments when we really try to help people understand, like in that long game kind of principle, like that this is a long game. Like unless you take the time to listen to people and build trusted relationships with people who have not been involved in this before, that's when the magic of this process happens. We always just try to help connect people back into the bigger picture, that we are going to do things, like things will get done, but it's much more possible that they'll succeed if we do this work right now. And in the long scheme of things, we're not spending that much time doing it. We're going to spend a couple months gathering some stories. The encouraging thing, I think, is when after they do gather some stories and gather some data, when the leadership team really sits down to crunch the data, that's where you see the real learning take place. They're looking at all this data and all these things that they've heard. That's where I see the most impact, is the learning that the leadership team folks really in their brain really start to see what people care about. And at the same time that we're talking to people about what they care about, we're also getting ideas for action. Like what would make those things even better? What would strengthen our community? So they're seeing that stuff too. I just think keeping the big picture in mind is usually how I try to keep people focused on the action items that will eventually come. One of the encouraging things, and this happened in Cascade too, was we had several of these meetings where community members would sit down and really learn about the data and learn about some of the things that happened. And a lot of the city council members were sitting at those tables. And again, they weren't leading the meeting. They weren't up in front of the room getting yelled at or asked questions about, or why aren't you doing this? And how much money you spending on that? They were just participants, and they were sitting at these tables hearing from people about what they cared about and what would make this town better. After one of those meetings, one of the council members came up to me and he was like, well, that was really fun. Like to him, like community engagement he had not seen that before. So when you think about action items, like, you know, he wasn't getting, it wasn't like this confrontational thing. He was a learner along with everybody else. And I think to see kind of a light bulb go on at some point to say, yeah, maybe we could be doing this differently and not just have these council work sessions where they're behind this big table up on a podium with microphones and all this stuff. We could do this in a different way. So to me, like that's a little win. That's a little action item. It's not building a community center, but it's hopefully moving the needle a little bit in the community for thinking about doing things just a little bit differently and more meaningfully, I would hope.
Great, thanks. What questions do you have? We've got some time. You can ask them of me, Jason, Chantel, Jen, anybody. What questions do you have about the process?
No one's going to ask how much it costs. I can't believe that. Come on. What's going on out there? Usually the
Jason, how much does it cost?
Damn it, I kind of set myself up for that one, didn't I? Well, in my experience, no one likes to hear the answer, or no one likes to hear it depends, but it really does kind of depend upon the size of the community, the resources at hand. As far as like the scope of the project, how quickly do they have to have it done? Are they going to hire a coordinator on the ground to run the process? Most of the successful projects we've seen have found a way to hire someone. Chantel, bless her heart, kind of did it as a volunteer. And for better or for worse, right, Chantel? I mean, it's hard for volunteers to do this work. So I think that's one of the biggest factors, is how many resources are available locally to do that. The Heart and Soul organization does have a seed grant program. And I don't know, Daniel, if you were planning, or Sarah or Joan or anybody wants to talk about that at some point.
Yep.
But that's a way to really literally plant the seed for this process in your community and get some immediate resources to cover some of those higher cost expenses. Aside from the coordination, my experience has been that the process is not super expensive. I think to do really meaningful community engagement and to tell the stories effectively, you do need to invest in having events and have pizza parties and ice cream socials and banners and print flyers and, rent tents and, food trucks, and these kinds of things do cost money, but we're not talking giant amounts of money here. So with the seed grant program and some of the resources that are available locally, I know Chantel and Cascade, the city council devoted some dollars to this. The community foundation devoted some dollars to it. It wasn't it's not a dramatically expensive process. So I'm not going to give you all a dollar figure, because that's something that coaches then work through with their local teams to figure out the scope and the scale and how much would it cost and put together a budget for it. But it's very individualized. I've done programs that covered a whole county. Those processes look different than a town of 1,500 people. So.
And it's my impression too, that a lot of that money that is spent on the process is spent on those activities, those events, and it's staying in the community too. It's not like leaving to pay for somebody outside of the community. So that's a big plus of the process too. There's a question, Joni said, how did I find community heart and soul? I was looking for better ways to engage communities. And so it really, out of that search, found Heart and Soul. Specifically, I think I found the network analysis tool, the community network analysis tool. And it all kinds of light bulbs went off in my head of this makes a lot of sense for how we find people in the community and how we can engage them. So it was kind of my own research, and then digging more into it, and then some Community Heart and Soul has a big support network as well. The Community Heart and Soul mothership. I don't know if they'd appreciate me calling it a mothership, but it's lots of wraparound resources that are really, really helpful, really educational, that support learning and getting to know the process. So tapping into all of those has been really great. Great. Well, yeah, how long does it take to develop a specialized quote for the community? That's a good question. I guess, Terry, I would start to answer that by saying, let's just have a conversation. There are some templates that Community Heart and Soul has based on communities that have done this in the past, and starting to sketch in some estimated costs. But as Jason mentioned, it does take knowing more about what you might be looking at, what are the assets in the community, and having some conversations. So I would say there would be some conversations that would need to be had in the on-ramp that might take a little bit of time. But anything else to add there, Jason, or other Community Heart and Soul folks?
Yeah, I would say what you've described is pretty accurate, Daniel. Just there's a few conversations involved. I always kind of think about it as kind of concentric circles of interest. Like usually you've got one or two people who are interested. And then once you kind of talk with a coach and you say, who else should we get involved in this conversation? Then there's the kind of the next little circle outside of community leaders who also should know about this. And then you kind of keep expanding out a little bit to really understand folks who need to be at the table, but also what resources can be brought into it. Like what community partners are going to be at the table. Is the school district going to be involved? Is the city going to be involved? Is the chamber going to be involved? Economic development folks. You know, as they all get involved, different resources also kind of come to the table. So it's really it's not a time-consuming process, but it can be complicated sometimes to make sure you've got everybody involved. But it can be done fairly quickly, especially for communities that have resources to devote to something like this. Oh, our city council has a community engagement budget. Like there's councils that have that. Well, let's talk about it then. You know, that helps things move more quickly.
Yeah, I would say generally too, just it's seemed to me also more like this is something that we're kind of discerning whether the community wants to make this commitment and wants to do this together, rather than just we're plugging in numbers into the formula and are going to spit out a quote. So So it's a little bit different than maybe a typical, like we're getting a contract from a consultant or something like that. So the conversational nature of that is a little bit different too. I'm going to cut us off right here, and I'm going to pass it to Sarah. She's from Community Heart and Soul, the Senior Director. And if you have any other questions, please feel free to add them in the chat. And if we don't get to them, we can definitely follow up or reach out to me via email. But I'm going to pass it to Sarah, and she's going to share just a little bit about the resources that they have at Community Heart and Soul and what next steps might look like, how we can tap into those if communities are interested.
Thanks, Daniel. So I just wanted to take this opportunity to really quickly talk a little bit about our seed grant that both Jason and Daniel mentioned, and just show you where to go to find that information. So I've just shared the screen, and I'm at our communityheartandsoul.org website. So at the top here, you can see along this top bar that we have seed grants here. So if you go here, this gives you all of the information that a community needs to look into our seed grant opportunity. And again, this is a $10,000 grant to basically, again, get started with Community Heart and Soul, gives the community an opportunity to, through the application process, to build on those concentric circles again that Jason was just talking about, to bring the people in the community together, because part of the application process too is doing some of those very beginning exploration activities into who lives and works and plays in our community. What are the assets that we already have here? So some of the activities that are actually potentially built into the application are a great way to bring people together just to even talk about the process itself. So just some quick information. It's a $10,000 grant. It does have a $10,000 cash match to it. That is part of the application, that the community brings $10,000 to the table as well to match it. We do have, so we have a population, kind of what we call our sweet spot of 2,500 to 30,000. There are interesting ways to think about population. Some communities have looked at the population of their school district. You know, it may be not just the municipality, but all the farms and ranches around the area, you know, they would count in the population. So there are different ways, if you're looking at a smaller community, to think about how you can successfully look at the population to equate to 2,500 people. On this page, we've got the actual application is right there. And then right here, we have the grant guidelines. I won't go into that because it's going to pop me out into a different screen, but there's a nice booklet that talks all about those guidelines. And then here, we've got a couple different recordings that you can look at, and then actually the submission for the online application. Now, if I just, so tell me, if I go here, do you see this, a different screen now? All right. So I just wanted to quickly show you this too, because we have here a story about a community in Massachusetts, and there's I'm not going to click on it now, but there's a nice video here that talks about Winchendon, Massachusetts, and how they use the seed grant to really jumpstart their process. And they have this really great story of youth involvement. That's part of their story. That's great. And I just saw this when I was looking at this just today. The very top here on the right side, we have a new story that came out just today about Postville, Iowa, who has also just started their process. Jason is their coach, and this is their story of how their community is getting started. And they were also a successful seed grant applicant. So there's a great story there too. And this is just on our blog. Maybe I can just put this link into the chat too. But feel free as well just to get in touch. And if you want to know more about the seed grant and how that works, that's as Daniel said, that takes place at the mothership, so we can help you out with that. Also happy to answer any questions. I don't want to cut it or get us right up to the end of our time here. I want to give plenty of time to Daniel too to tie things up, but happy to answer any questions you might have. And I'll pop that link in there in the chat as well.
Great. Thanks, Sarah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's really all the material that we have today. So thanks for learning a little bit more about Community Heart and Soul. As far as next steps, I think the next step would probably be to introduce another person in your community to Community Heart and Soul. See what they think about it. Share what I recorded of this with them. Share the resources online of Community Heart and Soul with them. Even just the ideas of involving everybody, of playing the long game, of focusing on what matters most. Share some of those ideas with people in your community, see what they think. And then you can invite us to town. We'll be happy to talk to a group of 2 people or a group of 15 people, whatever the next step looks like. And then there are some you'll see on Community Heart and Soul's website, and in the process, there's these getting started resources. So having some getting started conversations in your community, talking with elected officials and community organizations, and then brainstorming those resources to get an estimate for what's it going to take, what assets can we already draw on, what kind of funding do we need to pull together to do this. So really, it starts with just having another conversation. So please get in touch and let us know if you have any other questions. Yeah, we see this as just a really, I think there's an opportunity in Nebraska for this, and it's a good model that focuses on I think what's most important for our towns to be able to move forward. So please be in touch, and thanks, everybody.